Contrary to some of the spicy headlines you may have seen, Indiana is not going to have to forfeit the national championship they just won against Miami.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We made it. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Postgame on the Hurricanes Radio Network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the #1 Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Have your cake and drink it too. Birthday cake flavor is back. No fork needed. It's party time. Order now at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. On this loaded episode, we're going to be answering questions from Locked On Canes everydayers on ACC rule changes, including those tiebreakers that cost Miami an ACC championship game appearance last year, the Hurricanes' goals for the 2026 season coming up. But let's start with a story that got a lot of buzz and went viral yesterday from On3 Sports. It was all over your social media timelines. I may have done some work in stoking the fires a little bit, but let's get to this. Our everydayer named Ralph asks, Donno, is it possible that Indiana is going to be forced to vacate their national title for using an ineligible player last season? The short answer, Ralph, is no. But here's the situation. So On3 Sports, and then this was aggregated by everybody, they posted an article yesterday that, the NCAA is still in court against a handful of players last year that they deemed to be ineligible. Like the NCAA said to these players, you're not eligible, you can't play the 2025 season, but these players were able to get court injunctions and play anyway, right? There was a player from San Diego State, a player from Memphis, and then, most notably, Indiana Hoosier safety Lewis Moore, who played in all 16 games last year, including the national championship game, finished third on the Hoosiers with 88 tackles last year. So the NCAA had told him before last season, you are ineligible, you can't play, but he took it to court in Texas. I'm not exactly sure why Texas was the venue, and he was granted an emergency injunction, and he was allowed, by law. So they went over the NCAA's head on this one, and Lewis Moore was allowed to play. So it happened. Indiana won a national championship, in my view, fair and square. But the NCAA, despite that emergency injunction, the actual case has not been fully settled yet. And there's some chatter out there that if the NCAA wins that case and they win the other ones with those players from Memphis and San Diego State, that theoretically they could force Indiana to pay hefty fines and even vacate wins, okay? But when I tell you guys, nothing's going to happen with the national championship, here are the reasons. Reason number one, in case you're not aware, the NCAA's record in court is worse than Mike Norvell's record in 2024 with the Florida State Seminoles when they went 2-10. I can't think of the NCAA outside of the Charles Bediako ruling. I think that's the only time they've ever won anything in court over eligibility. And, a lot of folks say that, hey, when that judge granted Lewis Moore the injunction that allowed him to play, the judge did that with the anticipation that he was going to win his case anyway at the end of the season. Right? Now, the other thing is, even if Indiana and Lewis Moore were to somehow lose in court, which I wouldn't expect to happen, but even if they did lose in court, the worst thing that could happen for them is vacating regular season wins only, because the NCAA does not govern eligibility for the college football playoff. The CFP committee does that on their own without the NCAA's involvement. So you could have a wacky thing happen where Indiana's record would go from 16-0 to 3-13 officially, but they would still be the national champions. The NCAA cannot take away that national championship. And let me put this on record as a Miami Hurricanes guy, because I know 5 minutes into this episode, I have Miami haters and Indiana fans. They're screaming at their phones and their TVs and their computers, however you watch or listen to this show. But I want to go on record as saying, as a Miami guy, even if there existed a scenario where Indiana was forced to forfeit their national championship, I would not want Miami to claim it. That's not how I want to win Miami's sixth national title. It's not. Miami lost the game on the field. Indiana outplayed Miami. I was proud of our Hurricanes for keeping the game close. To have the game come down to a final possession down 6 where you had a chance to win, but they didn't. Carson Beck threw an interception. You know, no matter who was ineligible or eligible, you're not going to change the fact that Miami allowed that blocked punt for a touchdown to happen. That had nothing to do with Lewis Moore, to my knowledge, okay? So I don't want to claim a title that way. I don't want to take a championship away from Indiana that I saw them out there win it on that field, and I saw them win all of the 16 games that they played. And to me, this whole saga is just more evidence about how the NCAA has completely lost the plot, and they've completely lost whatever power they used to think that they had, because they're not going to win in court. And even if they do, it doesn't change the fact that a judge allowed Moore to play all 16 games last season, and Indiana went on to win a national championship. So that's the end of the story for me. Miami's sixth national championship, hopefully it happens on the field, fair and square, in this upcoming 2026 season. I don't want to win a national championship by forfeit, right? If you were to go back and like change the outcome of the 2002 Fiesta Bowl, maybe that's something, because that was a terrible call on the field that ripped that moment away. This one, nothing to do with that. Indiana can keep the title, and I don't think the NCAA is going to win in court anyway. We get a question from Locked On Canes everydayer named Ian, who says, how are we looking on running back, tight end, and cornerback coaches search? Any idea also on when spring practices will start? All right, so on spring practices, there's no official start date yet. The buzz going around is March 24th. Might be the day that begins, but that's unconfirmed. You know, we do know that Miami is going to wait till after spring break, which is in mid-March. They're going to give their players extra time because the season went so long, all the way to January 19th. So, I don't know. I'm kind of unofficially anticipating March 24th to be the opening day of spring football, but that is not confirmed yet. As far as the coaching searches, you know, we did an episode last night on cornerbacks coach, because there's growing buzz for Patrick Surtain. You know, of course, legendary former high school coach in the area, spent the last couple of years at Florida State, was actually surprisingly fired by Mike Norvell. I mean, Patrick Surtain was probably the one assistant coach that most Florida State fans wanted to keep, not get fired. Excellent recruiter, highly regarded as an X's and O's guy and a teacher. But he and Mike Norvell, they didn't get along, and their philosophies clashed, and it ultimately cost him his job. Surtain is a relentless recruiter, and I could see him fitting in on a Mario Cristobal staff if he gets that job. But I'm also a big fan of Terry Jefferson, who's within the staff right now, gunning for a promotion. Coach Jefferson was an assistant DB's coach this past season, working primarily with the nickel corners, and your starting nickel, Keontae Scott, was one of the best players in the country this past year. Terry Jefferson, I believe, had a lot to do with just how great of a season Keontae had. So I could see that being a great hire as well, whether you want to promote from within or if you give an opportunity to someone like Coach Surtain. I don't have the greatest feel on tight ends coach candidates right now, but you guys know I fully endorse Edwin Pata, former Miami staffer who's currently at FIU. I would love to see him get that job. As far as like running back coach names being thrown around, I know Gary Furman at Kane Sport, one of the names he mentioned is Chad Scott, who's currently at North Texas. I remember Chad Scott's name coming up a couple years ago when Miami's running back coach job was open. I think he's a tremendous coach. He's at North Texas right now. He's previously been at spots like Texas and West Virginia. He's a former interim head coach of West Virginia. I think he would be an excellent hire if Miami can get that done. Benedict Hippolyte, who's currently at FIU, is also a name that I see mentioned for Miami's running back coach opening. Mario operates very quietly on these coaching searches. The loafers move in silence, as we say. So there's probably some names in the mix that nobody's talking about, but that's just kind of where we're at right now. We'll keep it rolling here on Locked On Canes. I got a great question about what Miami's realistic goals are for the upcoming 2026 season. And by the way, if you want to become an everydayer, make sure you click the link in the show notes below or go to lockedoncanes.supercast.com and join the all access tier. There's a lot of benefits and exclusive content that come with that. You want to keep it locked. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Welcome to the 5-Hour Energy Flavor Draft. We're looking at every aspect of the draft to let you know which tasty flavors are the best and which just might be sleepers. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and only one is going to take the top spot. 5-Hour Energy has a wide variety of flavors and something for everyone. There's a lot of flavors I haven't tried yet that I want to. I'll tell you, a first-round candidate for me with my number one overall pick. I've talked about berry, but I also need to talk about grape. Another classic flavor. It's smooth, almost syrup-like fruit profile. It's consistent, straightforward, and it's a classic purple candy style finish. I'm a huge fan of grape. And some of the sleepers, guys, for a sleeper, how about Hawaiian Breeze? You can feel the breeze and taste the caffeine. It's made with passion fruit, which I love, orange and guava. It's sweet yet smooth. It's tangy yet tart. So, folks, you want to check out these and so many more of the awesome flavors here. Find your new favorite flavor of 5-Hour Energy shots, available online at 5hourenergy.com or available on Amazon. We're also proudly brought to you by FanDuel. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you've already been looking at the board and thinking about which team can make that deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it also could send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen. And we're answering questions from the Everydayers. Part of the Everydayer Club features one-on-one texting with me when you join that all-access tier. And we're answering questions from those one-on-one texts right now. Visit the link in the show notes below or go to lockedoncanes.supercast.com to become an Everydayer. We get a good question from Delane, who says, so expectations for Miami are an ACC championship and another college football playoff run. But what do you think the verdict would be if we somehow did last year's run all over again? All right, so in terms of, I assume what you mean by last year's run is you make it to the championship game even without winning the ACC title. Hey, listen, man, if that were to happen, I wouldn't complain about it. I mean, 2 straight national championship appearances, whether or not you win your conference, that's a successful season, right? Look at it this way. Duke won the ACC. Miami didn't. But can anyone outside of, a Miami hater or, a Duke fanatic, even most Duke fanatics would admit, I mean, if you were to ask the question, who had the more successful season? Miami, who didn't win an ACC championship, or Duke, who did? Almost anyone's going to say Miami had the more successful season, and objectively they would be correct. So I would take it, Delane. But I've been talking for weeks about how I badly want this upcoming season, 2026, to be the year that Miami finally wins an ACC championship. I think that's an important goal that this program has somehow never reached in over 20 years in that conference. It would be another important trophy to add to your trophy case, a nice banner to add into your stadium. And so it's important to me, right? And, for what it's worth, the easiest path into the CFP is winning the ACC because you get an automatic bid now. That didn't have that last year, is why Duke didn't get in. There is going to be an automatic bid for next year. And, I'd like to see Miami finally do that. And on paper, again, this is on paper. Game is played on grass. But nobody on paper in the ACC looks nearly as good as Miami does for next year. So I want to see them finally get that done on the field. So that's my big goal. We get one from Zach from Jacksonville who says, hey, based on what we saw from the playoff committee last year, do you think Mario and the coaching staff will try to stack as many style points as possible all year instead of potentially finding ourselves with our backs against the wall needing style points late like we did last season? So when it comes to style points, I think the lesson learned last year wasn't really about style points to impress the committee, but it was about being creative. You can call it style points. I just call it creativity, right? Mixing up your playbook, not running into the A gap every single play. I think the lesson you learned last year was you get conservative, you get beat. Right? Which is ironic because that's something Shannon Dawson said 3 years ago or 4 years ago when he first got the job as offensive coordinator. But, sometimes he went away from that and got a little bit too conservative. So, maybe you wouldn't have lost the Louisville or the SMU game had you been a little bit more creative and open on offense and taken a few more risks. I think that was the lesson. And maybe that's what you were asking. Because when you talk about style points, and a lot of people criticize Miami for this. When they beat Virginia Tech in the second to last game of the season, Miami was comfortably up. It was 27 to 17. And Miami, could have just taken a knee and gotten out of there. Instead, you throw to the corner of the end zone to Malachi Toney to go up 34 to 17, which looks a lot better. Miami's not going to be doing that. They felt like they had to do that because of the situation they were in being compared to Notre Dame for the college football playoff. But, Miami's not going to be doing that first or second game of the year. As long as you're winning your games, you don't have to worry about that. But again, I think the lesson that was learned was not really about impressing the playoff committee. I think the lesson learned was stay creative, and it's going to give you a better chance to win football games. And now having Darian Mensah as your quarterback, who excels pushing the ball downfield, and he excels with extending plays and improvisation and athleticism, I think Miami's going to be, just by nature and by identity, more aggressive in 2026 on offense than they were in 2025. And you've got playmakers galore in your wide receiver room as well, right? With Malachi Toney and now Cooper Barkate added to that mix, you're going to have no problem staying creative and not getting overly conservative. We get a question from Bucks Canes in Georgia who says, hey, has Darian Mensah taken the offensive line out to dinner yet? That's a rite of passage, and his life next season literally depends on it. So we usually find that stuff out when we get the first availability in spring ball. So, when we spoke with Carson Beck for the first time last year, he told us the stories of taking the O-line out to dinner. And actually, because Carson wasn't allowed to speak until the summer, I think it was actually teammates of his in spring ball told the story, like Beck invited us over for March Madness, and we had a Super Bowl party. We watched the game together, and he bought the food and stuff. Same thing with Cam Ward the year before. So I'm sure we'll find out about that after the fact. I would be shocked if Mensah hasn't taken his dudes out to dinner already. I'm like 99.999% sure that's already happened at this point, and they probably did have like a Super Bowl get together as Miami quarterbacks will usually do with their teammates. There was the documented Prime 112 dinner that they had the night that Mensa and VACATE committed to Miami, where they did go out with, I don't know who picked up the tab for that one, but they did go out to dinner with some current and former Miami players. But yeah, I'm sure the team building stuff has happened. We just don't have the official accounts of that happening just yet. But yeah, you're right. You want to take that O-line to dinner because you want to keep those guys as large as possible and as motivated as possible to protect you on Saturdays. We get a completely unrelated question. This is so random. Martin from Yucatan says, hey, what's Bruce Warner's favorite restaurant? I think his favorite restaurant, and he still needs to take, we don't get together nearly enough, me and Bruce, but he talks a lot about Sicilian Oven, a pizza chain down in like North Broward. He's got to take me to, and I know he likes La Spada because he and I went to La Spada together when we did our meet and greet at Canesware, and who doesn't love La Spada hoagies? Those are fantastic. But yeah, I'll have to double check with Bruce, but I think Sicilian Oven might be his go-to. But he's also a South Floridian, so I'm sure Flanagan's is up there as well because that's up there for all of us, right? It's one of my favorites of all time. We get one from D Money Jr., who says, hey, I know us Canes fans are disappointed we didn't win the Natty, but nobody is talking about how Miami did win the Fiesta and Cotton Bowls all in one season. Winning those bowls was a very big deal in back-to-back weeks if you played in those, so let's celebrate that. Yeah, you're right. First of all, Miami had never won the Fiesta Bowl before. That was the first time ever. So Miami now joins the Texas Longhorns as the only programs to win like all of the major 6 bowl games. So you have that as a feather in your cap. And I don't take it for granted, D Jr., that in the same season, Miami beat every one of their rivals. Notre Dame, Florida State, Florida, Ohio State, who we've despised for many, many years. You beat all of those teams in the same. I mean, Virginia Tech, if you want to include them as a historic rival, like you beat all of your rivals in the same year, and like you mentioned, you won 2 major bowl games in the same postseason. So it's something to be proud of. Right? We stay motivated because the goal is to win national championships. That's the ultimate goal. Miami fell short of that, but I don't take the journey for granted because Miami had to win some big games to get to that point. We got a question from our guy Pat Mack about who's still available in the transfer portal. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes.
I'm Clea Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. It was a heavyweight showdown between number 3 South Carolina and number 7 LSU, and the Gamecocks rose to the occasion. South Carolina secured a hard-fought 79-72 victory to stay atop the SEC standings, using a balanced offensive attack to outlast the Tigers. Tessa Johnson led the way with 21 points, while Raven Johnson added 19. Medina Okot dominated the paint with a double-double, finishing with 12 points and 17 rebounds, while Joyce Edwards chipped in 10 points to round out the scoring. With the statement win, the Gamecocks now turn their attention to a road matchup at number 23 Alabama on Thursday. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen. We've been answering questions from the Everydayer Club today. By the way, as one of the Everydayer Club benefits, I finally figured out how to use my own Discord server. So we have that rocking and rolling, and especially when Miami basketball and Miami baseball are playing, make sure if you're an all-access Everyday, or even the regular Everydayer tier as well, you're checking out the conversations that are happening on Discord, because I want to make that really more of a thing moving forward. We get a question from Pat Mack, who says, hey, I actually do have a question for you. Are there any portal players who remain unsigned that we either need or want? He says, I'm still hoping for a good flip. Thanks again for all you do for us. Okay, so first thing, there's only one transfer portal window this year. It was the winter window in January. There is no more spring window. But as you know, when players enter the portal, there's the deadline to get in the portal, but there's not a strict deadline to sign. So technically, there are still some players who are in the transfer portal who have not signed with other programs yet. It's kind of a ghost town, though. Most of like the really good players have been picked up by now. And also, graduate transfers no longer have separate deadlines. Graduate transfers technically have the same portal deadlines as everybody else, unless there are extenuating circumstances, which you never know. I mean, we talked about how the NCAA is no longer capable of enforcing their own rules. There may be some extenuating circumstances, but as of right now, I guess like a position you would say, maybe Miami might think about adding more depth would be offensive line, because you don't have a whole lot of experience in that room. I think there are a couple of like somewhat decent O linemen, and they're still in the portal, but I don't really see either of them being better than anyone Miami already has. Broderick Schull from Auburn, who's a former 4-star recruit. He was just a true freshman this past year, didn't play. He left Auburn. He's unsigned, like talented guy, but no experience. Tyrell Green from Purdue is an O lineman who's in the portal who does have some experience, but again, like, if these were players Miami really wanted, I think they would have gone after them a month, 2 months ago. So, my unofficial prediction, Pat, is that Miami is done in the portal. I think the class of 13 individuals that they brought in is going to be where it ends for them, unless, you have, God forbid, any like serious injuries that happen during spring football. Then maybe you might circle the wagons and look at who's available in the portal. But I think we're probably done, and the quality of available players in the portal at this point is not very good. We get a question from Dat Dude 239. Do you think that Miami's athletic director would entertain it if any other conference would approach him about leaving the ACC? He says, I know Miami is at the top of the ACC, but joining another conference could be huge. What are your thoughts? I think you always have to entertain any possibility of putting yourself in a better profile and creating more revenue. So I think the short answer to your question is, if an opportunity came up, I think you would have to entertain it. There's also something that we talked about on the ACC squad yesterday was some buzz that like some of the big brands, even within the Big Ten, could theoretically think about breaking away from a big conference, going independent, and being able to keep a higher percentage of your TV revenue. And I know for a fact that that's something that people have proposed to Miami. What about going independent, maybe forming an alliance with a few other schools? And, that way you kind of cut the ACC middleman out and you make more revenue. But I don't think that's ever progressed so far, because there are a lot of obstacles to doing something like that. Because, again, you also have, dozens of sports to carry, and, Olympic sports that are less popular you have to think about. It's not 100% a football decision when you do these things. But listen, I think you're always going to entertain those ideas. But I will say, being in the ACC right now is not as bad as it was a couple years ago. Miami, as just earned over $20 million of extra revenue due to their deep college football playoff run, because the ACC lets you keep 100% of the revenue you earn in the CFP. So Miami ends up earning roughly $70 million from last season, which is only about $2.5 million less than SEC schools earned with their revenue payout. So if you have successful seasons in the ACC, like Miami just did, you can actually end up earning a ton more revenue than the bottom feeders do. So the ACC is not that bad of a place to be right now, if we're being honest. We get a question that says, hey, personal question from my 11-year-old who has UM alumni aspirations. Were you a Hurricanes fan before you went to the U? If not, why did you choose the U? I was. I'm a lifelong Hurricanes fan. My father was a professor at the U from even before I was born. Born and raised in Miami, so it was always all about the U in my house, and that very much motivated me to want to go to Miami. So I mean, for me, I've loved Miami my entire life, and then being able to and listen, I'm not a gatekeeper of fandom. I'm not one of those people who says you have to go to the school that you cheer for. It's nonsense. If you want to cheer for Miami, no matter what school you went to FIU, you went to some school on the other side of the country, the love for the University of Miami brings us together. I don't gatekeep anyone's fandom, but I will say, just from my own personal experience, the fact that I grew up, idolizing University of Miami sports, for years before I enrolled there, like that made my college experience extra magical, right? To have grown up going to games in the Orange Bowl and then going as a student for the first time when I got there, it hit different, man. It was really cool. So I hope that your young one, your 11-year-old ends up getting that experience. That question came from Grace and Izzy. Thank you so much for the question. Let's see. Bob, the ultimate Canes fan, asks, is the ACC still in the process of making changes before the start of the season? I haven't heard anything about the conference championship tiebreaker changes. Also, any changes to the officiating? I mean, I think we would all love officiating changes. I haven't heard anything in that regard. As far as the tiebreakers, 100% they're changing those. They've said several times they're changing their tiebreaker scenarios. I don't think they've finalized exactly what those changes are yet. I would imagine that by the time we get to the ACC football kickoff conference in mid-July, they'll know exactly what those changes are, and they're going to announce those to us. So I believe that the tiebreaker changes, and the tiebreaker became very controversial last year because they allowed a 7-5 Duke team with the same conference record as 10-2 Miami. Duke got to the ACC championship game, and Miami did not because of wonky tiebreakers that had nothing to do with how successful either team was on the field. So I know the next tiebreaker format, I think they're not only going to take in mind strength of overall record, which I think has to be heavily weighted, but I believe they're also going to take into account the college football playoff rankings. So if you were in that scenario where, Miami is in a 5-way tie with 4 other teams like they were last year, I think one of the top tiebreakers would be which of those 5 teams has the highest college football playoff ranking, because the ultimate goal for you is to get as many teams into the CFP as possible. So I think you have to weigh, you have to use heavy weight on the college football playoff ranking. So that's something that I expect to come into play as well. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On Canes your first listen. Make sure you smash the like button and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your pods. And we'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the #1 Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.